Welcome to the Black on Shelf podcast, a podcast championing Black and brown entrepreneurs on the digital and physical shelves. I'm your host, Tanaj Ferguson. This is Black on Shelf.
All right. Welcome back to the podcast, guys. This is season 2. We are talking to Ibraheem Basir from A Dozen Cousins. I was just telling Ibraheem, we've been waiting so long to talk to him, and persistence certainly pays. He's definitely a busy guy running A Dozen Cousins. They are a line of soulfully seasoned black beans and rice, a line of soulfully seasoned beans and rice. We're going to get into the product line, how it's healthy, how it's great, how it's inspired by Latin American, Caribbean, and Creole foods. You know, meet Bahamian girl. I love the sound of that and also love the beans. But we're going to learn all about Ibraheem today and A Dozen Cousins as a brand. So welcome to the podcast. We love to see you here. Love the background. For those watching visually, you can see all the beautiful products pictured behind him. Why don't you start out and tell us a little bit more about you, Ibraheem?
Yeah, so first and foremost, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be a guest as well. And, you know, as I mentioned in the preview, I'm sorry it took us so long to make it happen, but very happy to be here. Yeah, so just by way of intro, you know, my name's Ibraheem Basir. I'm the founder and CEO of A Dozen Cousins. I'm from Brooklyn originally and grew up in a really big family. So I have 9 siblings, 11 nieces and nephews. And then when my daughter was born, she was the 12th cousin, which is where the brand gets its name from. And, you know, I always start there just because food was a really big deal for us growing up. You know, that was how we showed each other love. It's how we celebrate holidays. It's how we marked milestones. And so I always knew I wanted to work in the food industry. Fast forward many years, got my MBA, started my career working at a large CPG company, worked on a ton of different national food brands, some very conventional, but eventually started really honing in the natural and organic world. And so got a chance to work on a few really cool brands like Larabar, brands like Annie's Organic, and just fell in love with the ethos of the natural product movement, you know, food that was better for your body, better for the planet, more responsible, businesses that were run ethically and responsibly, and decided that I wanted a brand like that for my community and the people who I reached a point really where it was almost like I was living this double life. You know, during the day, I would eat these really healthy, organic, natural type foods that I was working on, you know, at my job. And then I'd go home and have chicken and biscuits, empanada, whatever type, you know, more cultural foods, some of the foods that I had grown up with, but maybe weren't quite as healthful. And so the whole idea behind A Dozen Cousins was to try to bring these two worlds together, right? To take everything that I was learning about sourcing, ingredients, health and wellness, and pair it with foods and the flavors that I had grown up with and that I enjoyed. And that's what we ended up doing. So I'll pause there for a second. I could keep going and talking.
No, I love that story. It's so authentic for you, just recognizing your own experience, being introduced to this natural product movement, which was really big at the time when you really were first getting into CPG. Why rice and beans?
Yeah, so, you know, we spent, as you can imagine, a lot of time thinking about, okay, what should our first categories be? And what I ultimately landed on was, you know, I wanted a product that combined taste, health, and culture. Those were like the 3 pillars, right? It had to be delicious. There would be really no trade-off. Something that you actually would want to eat. It had to be something that was meaningfully helpful. You know, a lot of brands, you know, they talk about health foods or things that are better for you, and it's really not. It's kind of like placebo or just a little bit on the margin. And, you know, with beans in particular, you know, legumes are some of the healthiest foods on the planet, just pound for pound. And so I felt really good about those from a health perspective. And then finally, it was around culture, you know, wanting to find foods that stood for more than just filling up your stomach, you know. And so beans were, again, a very obvious choice for our first product because you have this emotional connection with beans throughout the Southern U.S., the Caribbean, Latin America, etc. Every region has a bean that they hold near and dear, whether that's red beans in Louisiana, pinto beans in Mexico, black beans in the Caribbean, chickpeas in Trinidad. You know, you can kind of go down the list. So that's how we landed on beans as the first product. And then, of course, rice became a very natural pairing, right? Once you have a lot of beans, they just kind of go together. So
Speaking of culture, you know, you were living in New York and really been influenced by your own community that looked very diverse and a melting pot of flavors. Talk to me about how you use that experience to say, hey, I'm going to turn this into various product lines versus feeling like I have to just stick with a cultural heritage that was just my own. Because in your case, you were actually inspired by these other cultures' cuisine.
Yeah, so I grew up in Brooklyn. For anyone that's grown up in Brooklyn, they know that it's a huge black and brown melting pot, right? So if you think about my high school, I went to school alongside people from the southern U.S., West Africa, all throughout the Caribbean, all throughout Latin America, and so that was true for like my apartment building as well, right? My mother would trade recipes with our neighbors. They might be in the laundromat and say, okay, how do you cook this? Let me show you, or come by my house, I'll show you how to make this particular dish. Or my older sisters, I remember the first time that my older sister came home and cooked empanadas. We were all blown away. She had a Puerto Rican classmate that showed her how to make them. And so it was just this very organic kind of passing of foods and flavors back to one another. Obviously, we'd eat at these restaurants that were there as well. And so, it became kind of the palate of my family, if you will, that we would eat food from throughout the Caribbean, Latin America, from the South. That's where my mother's from. My mother's from South Carolina. So she had her red beans that she would cook as well, her black eyed peas. And so when the time came to sit down and create A Dozen Cousins, my goal was just to be authentic to the experience that I had grown up with. If I could have made a soul food brand, I presume,
Right.
and just stuck with my mom's recipes, but that it wouldn't have really reflected the flavors and the foods that I grew up with. And that's really what, how it came to be.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your background. You did do both your undergrad and MBA at UPenn. So the MBA at Wharton School of Business, top-notch program, of course. Just talk to me about some of the things that you learned there. And, could you talk about, from the corporate standpoint, you did end up going into corporate America. You started off on this straight and narrow track as well. It makes sense. Talk to us about what your experience was like at Wharton and how any of that might have prepared you for this journey that you're on now, the things you're still learning, the connections you may have now. Do you have any reflection on that?
Yeah, my academic experience, probably not unsimilar from a lot of people, was the things that I learned in the classroom were important, but a lot of the soft skills and the things that I learned outside of the classroom were just as important. And so, I'm a very introverted person by nature. I think for me going to business school, one of the big benefits was just working on a team with your peers and, having to navigate challenges where nobody was really in charge. There was no hierarchy. You had to kind of create your own systems of hierarchy or egalitarian approach, whatever the project required. And that for me was super helpful. I think it helped me come out of my shell a little bit just as a leader, as a business person, helped me form my own style of how I would relate with my peers and how I would get things done. So I love that. And then I also, I studied history as an undergrad and was very much more in like the humanities in terms of where my interests were. So business school in some ways was just a nice reset. It gave me an opportunity to learn the basics of, okay, how do you read a financial statement? What are the 4 P's of marketing? Just like a lot of very foundational business stuff I got from business school. And for me, it was a great experience that also enabled me to move into brand management. A lot of companies at the time in particular, I know this has changed since then, but the time you really needed an MBA to go in and manage like a large national brand. And so for me, it created that pathway into, General Mills, which is where I started my career.
Yeah. So you've worked for some pretty powerful brands. Talk to me about what that experience is like working on some of the top brands in corporate America and now running your own emerging business. Like this is the future of the big brands right here. This is it that you're building.
Hopefully, first of all, it's always like, it's very humbling to work on brands that have been around for 100 years or that are eaten by 1 million people just because of this, the scale of how many people love those products, touch those products. That was part of the thing that drew me. Another one of the things that drew me into CPG was the fact that your consumer base tends to be so wide and broad that like it's really a very democratic product in many ways. And so, when you're working on a big brand, that's usually what's top of mind. It's like, okay, trying to figure out what do people love about this product and making sure you don't mess with that, right? And that you continue to deliver it. And then at the same time, always trying to think about, okay, well, what don't they like about it? How are their opinions changing? How are the times changing, right? So like this balance between respecting heritage and understanding the legacy of these brands, but also trying to be innovative and push the brands forward, right? So that they're not stagnant. It's a really fun, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed that kind of duality of it. And I would say for myself with a dozen cousins, it's been invaluable having that experience, right? Because I'm able, I think about our brand much bigger than maybe it is in reality, right? I'm trying to make decisions and set a foundation so that we can be around 50 years or 100 years from now, and that a million people will have our products in their pantry. And so,
absolutely,
we try to live up to that standard versus, cutting corners or just trying to do things quickly or, make a quick dollar. Like our approach is we want to create a generational brand that's around for many decades. And so that's the lens that we look through all of our decisions with.
Yeah. What's some of the parts of your day or of your decision making that you feel like maybe your MBA or your corporate experience in the CPG space has not prepared you for?
It's a great question. The thing about being an entrepreneur that probably no education will prepare you for is the volatility of it, right? I have days where it's like, everything is hitting, it's clicking, we're on top of the world, right? And then you have days where you're like, man, I got some legitimate issues that need to be solved, right? And so for me, my biggest learning and the biggest journey I've been on over the last 3 years on a personal level is how do you keep an even keel, make good, sound decisions despite all the ups and downs, right? And then likewise, how do you compartmentalize it enough? I have 2 young daughters. I have, of course, a wife and a family. And, my goal is not to be bringing home the ups and downs of a dozen cousins home every day. And some of that's inevitable. We're all human, but those are my big challenges, right? Keep an even keel, keep work in its place so that I can also have a productive home life. And those are things that we did not cover in business school.
Yeah. So thinking about that, talk to me about your team. Like, does any of your family members work for you? Did you sort of have to look at the full landscape and say, who are the best people that I need for my team, whether they are people you already know or people you need to source? Tell us about that journey of sort of growing the Dozen Cousins team.
Yeah. So first and foremost, we're not a family business in the traditional sense. So I'm the only person in my family who actually works full time in the company. The rest of our employees are, professionals in the food and CPG space or in the marketing world that have joined our team. And, our approach to recruiting and to team building is pretty straightforward. It's like, number one, bringing in people that bring a unique skill set and that solve a need that we have as a business, right? And so, I don't know everything. And so as my knowledge base, as I've reached my ceiling or my bandwidth on certain areas, we brought in people who can complement that, right? So we have a director of sales who has many years of experience working in the CPG and the food world and understands retailers and price points and trade and all that kind of stuff. We got a supply chain manager who's managing inventory, who's looking at deductions and logistics routes and keeping our costs competitive. And again, all the things that go into it. And I could go down the list. Our social media manager, who's just a great copywriter, excellent pulse on culture. Sales and marketing associate, who's our voice of Gen Z, will, and a foodie in her own right. And so, every person on the team brings something very unique in terms of their skills. And that's how we think about building teams. Like everyone should be adding something. We're not just here to just, be around, right? Like it's like everyone business forward.
Yeah. So, I want to kind of look at this full circle. You did business school, you worked within the CPG space. During that period of time when you were in that part of the process, you hadn't built a dozen cousins yet. What did you want to be your end goal? What was that while you were in college? And then sort of when did that start to evolve to be a thing? You're like, I'm going to go after this. I'm going to build this thing. Talk to us about that part of your origins of you really recognizing that you could do this.
Yeah, so it's funny. My father was an entrepreneur, and I actually always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I didn't know exactly what industry it would be in or everything that entailed. But even when I was a little kid, I always thought about entrepreneurship as the pinnacle of where my professional career would go, just having seen my father go through that. And, from my father's perspective, he was very much focused on this idea of, freedom and autonomy. And, he had 10 children. I have 9 siblings, as I mentioned. So, as you can imagine, you got 10 kids, I might need to be here and not there, right? Or I need to take care of them, right? And so I always had this reverence for entrepreneurship. So even when I was in business school, I knew I wanted to try to start something. At the time, I just felt like I didn't have an idea that I was super passionate about. and I didn't feel like the practical experience or skills yet to successfully run a business. And so a lot of my time working at General Mills was focused on just building skills.
Mm-hmm.
How do you create a product? How do you design a package? How do you lead a team meeting? First time I was on a team meeting with 20 people and I was running the agenda. That was a learning experience for me, right? And so that's how I approached it. And then, once the ideas, I mentioned at the outset, once the idea and the mission became clear to me, this question of how do we bring Black and Latino cuisine into this natural product world? How do we make the space more diverse? How do we bring a different voice in? Once I had that, then I was like, okay, this is it. This is the thing that I've been waiting for. And from there, it was pretty easy.
Yeah. I think another thing about your experience is really interesting, and I'd love to lean into this for the Boss Fam is, so you're a millennial with a whole wife and kids and a whole business, right? I think we don't always see that picture of the entrepreneur, particularly in the Black community. We don't always see that person that has this full life experiences as a millennial. Talk to me about what difficulties that presents and how you're actively tackling that. Is this your circle? Does your circle look sort of like that as well? Having, a very strong professional life and a full-on family with multiple children. Tell me about that experience for you.
There's a lot to that question. I'm gonna try to peel apart a couple of layers. The first thing I would say is that balancing a family and a business is difficult, but I wouldn't consider either of them to be like an impediment to the other, right? It's just more so we've had to structure our lives in a way that it all works. You know what I mean? And so like even some of the things like decisions we made early on as a business, like I was probably a little more risk averse than maybe some of my peers because I have a young daughter at home. My wife just gave birth, right? Like I'm not trying to take out multiple mortgages and sell sell a bunch of stuff, right? It was like, okay, how do we raise money, allocate our savings, and start the business in a very responsible kind of metered way, right? So that impacted, I think, my approach to entrepreneurship for sure. I think today it certainly pushes my limits in terms of time management, right? When I was, 25, I'll probably sit down and watch a basketball game a couple of times a week, right? Today, just give me the highlights, right? I'll check in at playoff time, right? Like you have to squeeze some of the fat out of your schedule a little bit to kind of make it work. Yeah. But for me, of course, it's not even a question of like, I wouldn't give up either one of them, right? I love this business and what we've built, and I love my family, of course, and what we've built as well. So hopefully that starts to answer your question, but I feel like there might have been more to it. Maybe I missed.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it too. And one of the parts of that question, for you, it's priorities, essentially, is what you're saying. It really is about you understanding that both the business and your family is a priority, and that you had to master and manage both. Of course, not without mishaps on either end, but that is the balance. That is the challenge right there. That's the integration. Another part of that question was around, does your community or does your circle look like that? Have you been able to find other people who are balancing similar challenges so that as you navigate, having a family, needing to be at, maybe if your priority is being at some of the events or games and making your meeting, that you're able to understand what that might look like for you and feel okay with it. So basically understanding, do you have models within your friendship group or your colleague group that has a similar lifestyle as you?
For sure. I mean, first and foremost, one of the benefits of having 9 siblings is that you have this built-in friend group, right? I look at my sisters that, have multiple children and came before me. I look at my brothers who I spend, a lot of time with and talk to and get advice from. And we're all people who are very, family oriented. We came from a big family. We all wanted to have children and have families of our own. So I would say first and foremost, my peer group and the biggest influences on me have been my siblings, right? I would say second to that, after starting this business in particular, a ton of my network is other founders, right? I think we just naturally kind of flock together and get to know one another in the course of building these businesses. And so that also has become a really important support group. Sounds a little too medical, but you know what I mean? They're good sounding boards. You know what I mean? We're facing a lot of times the same challenges. How do you balance X and Y? How do you choose between A and B? How are you thinking about it? Have other founders in my network that also are parents. And so, you find peers and you find people who are navigating life in a similar way to you. And then, you guys kind of link up.
Yeah. What number are you amongst your siblings?
I'm number 7 out of 10.
How does that feel?
Honestly, I always joke we're all middle children. There's really there's one oldest, there's one
When you have 9, you're like, everyone's kind of the middle, except the oldest and the baby.
Exactly. My eldest sister, I think, feels and acts like the oldest. My youngest sister feels and acts like the youngest, and then all the rest of us are just kind of in the midst. The cool thing about it is we all have experience, I think, with being the leader, the role model, the person that someone's looking up to, and then at the same time, how we have experience being on the other side of that, right? And having someone to look up to and to model after. And so that to me is my biggest takeaway of having all those kids. I have older siblings that I look to and that I modeled myself after when I was younger. And likewise, I know that my younger siblings, they look to me and say, okay, how is he navigating this? And how is he handling this? And, I feel, there's a certain level of responsibility that comes with it.
Absolutely. How do they support the business? Or is it 8 other talking heads who's screaming, buy my brother's product? What does that look like in your family?
First and foremost, everyone loves the products. They love the brand, which, warms my heart. All, the cousins are many of their children. So I know they feel a connection to the brand in that way. Everyone approaches it a little bit differently. I have a sister who's like very active on social media, and she's, commenting and sharing it. And then I have others that are maybe a little more subtle. They might give a pouch to their neighbor or whatever the case may be. But everybody loves the business. There are certain areas where I'll reach out and get their advice. But it feels very much, it's all love. It's not like people trying to tell me what to do or vice versa. It's just, we're all just proud of what's been built so far.
Yeah, they have a lot to be proud of. So I want to get into talking about some milestones, because in this short amount of time, you really have broken out. There are some headwinds that have really helped in this case. When we think about the past few years, these are things that have really amplified your business. Like, for example, 2020, but you already had a ton of great traction going for you. Even before that, it just helped, and you were already ready. Talk to me of some of the personal milestones you have that you look at and say, man, these are things I'm proud of for the business. These are moments where we delivered and are excited and just, happy of what we were able to do. Talk to me about some of those milestones that you identify for you, your team, you personally, for the brand.
Yeah, I can share a few. So, for me, number one, if I'm just going kind of chronologically, was getting our first dollar, right? So that first sale, we launched the business on Amazon January of 2019. That was after a year of working on the business. And so, as you can imagine, in that year of packaging design and product development and everything that goes along with it, you're always under the fear of like, okay, well, is anyone going to buy this thing? Are people going to like it when they actually can buy it? And so to just start generating revenue was a huge milestone for me and for us as a business.
Yeah.
Second probably came in our second year when I was actually able to start paying myself. So in the early days, I didn't draw a salary. The business was very young. When we got to a revenue point where I could give myself a salary, that in and of itself just felt good, right? Because now it's a legitimate business. It's paying me, right? And then from there, there's been many, probably the next biggest one I would say has been hiring out our team. So for the first years of the business, it was just myself. I had a lot of, part-time and contract labor and agencies that I would work with. But in the last year, I think we hired 4 people, and we now
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's been big just in terms of spreading the work around and getting people who can really go deep and focus on certain important areas of the business. But also there's an element of just when someone turns over their career to you or to your company, it's a vote of confidence, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, we believe in what you're building. I'm willing to, dedicate my time and energy towards carrying it further. And so just on a spiritual level, it feels good to have a team and have, multiple people working on the business.
Yeah. Feeling blessed. Yes. Having that extra energy, and just, you really see that it's beyond you, by having, you were initially in that first year, the main person working on it, and now being able to have so many other people with that singular vision like you do, that does feel really good. So within your milestones, talk to me about which retailer was actually your first retailer.
Yeah, so the very first retailer to accept our item was actually the co-op. So the National Co-op Grocers, which is a collection of independent grocery stores. They were the first brick and mortar retailer to accept our item. And then very close behind them was Whole Foods. Whole Foods is our first national customer that, brought us in across the country. So that was a very big milestone. And then from there, we've had other, big ticket retailers that have kind of hit, Target, Walmart, Costco. Each of those have been kind of like, a step forward in terms of just other larger retailers that support the business.
Yes. I do want to talk through, as part of Milestones, I do want to talk through funding, right? You talked to us a little bit about being able to pay yourself like in 2020, more so a year after launching. Talk to me about how you got there. So, funding is often a big topic for any entrepreneur, especially those in the Black community where, sometimes it's an issue that keeps us from being able to start at all and definitely being able to scale. Talk to me about your funding experience and some of the things you've sort of learned just over the years of being, in this point, having, been in a lot of programs and having colleagues. What are some of your what is your funding experience with the brand? And then just some words of advice or experiential content you can give us around funding.
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, just in terms of grounding, we've had outside investors really since the day we launched the business. As I mentioned, I started this business with a 2-month-old daughter. And so, I put a certain amount of my own money at risk and my savings at risk, but I didn't want to put everything at risk, if you will. And so I always try to balance it with the right blend of personal capital and outside capital to manage the risk. And so, I had some angel investors, so, individuals that were investing their own money into our business. To this day, most of our investors are still individuals and family offices, so people that are just investing their own capital behind what we do. We do have a few institutional funds that have invested. So think about, people who have collected other people's money and are investing it on their behalf. Right. And so, we've gone through multiple rounds of funding. I would say in terms of like words of advice and maybe just general thoughts on fundraising, like number one, at the end of the day, capital is a tool, right? It's a tool to help you grow. And so you just want to think about money. At least myself, I try to think about the funding that we've raised in terms of where can it take the business, right? What is the milestone that it unlocks for us? And, in the early days, we were raising money so that we could design our packaging and develop our products, right? Then at a later point, we were raising money so that we could go into production and have working capital for inventory, right? Then at another stage, it was so that we could bring on a team and launch the business into new retailers, right? And so when you think about it from a very milestone-based perspective, for me at least, it removes some of the emotion a little bit from it. It's still a very emotional and emotionally draining process at times, but it's really a question of like, hey, do you believe that with this money, I can achieve this milestone that I've laid out? Do you believe in the vision that we're going after, the market we're going after? If you do, we can continue the conversation. If you don't, it's all good, right? Like this is my business thesis. This is my belief about the world. You can have a different set of beliefs. When I first started this company, 2018, 2019, a lot of the feedback that I got was, well, these are very niche products. People don't care about ethnic food. The market's very small. They won't pay this price point. They cook their own food at home. Like, kind of go down the list. Now, fast forward 3 years later, and, most people acknowledge the fact that global cuisine is on a major trend, right? In terms of foods and the flavors that people experience or experiment with, their ability to pay for, or their willingness to pay for those items, kind of go down the list. So my point being that people won't always see the same vision as you at the same time that you see it, and that actually is a good thing, right? Because it means that you're ahead of the market in some important way. So I'll pause there. Those are my initial thoughts on fundraising.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Using funding as a tool to grow. I do think that is probably one of the thoughts that keeps entrepreneurs back, particularly entrepreneurs of color, recognizing that it's not entirely just about someone taking your things. It's also about, well, you may not get where your vision can take you if you don't use these tools to grow. And I do think the education piece about understanding how can funding work in your favor, how much do you need, right? So, it's not that you need $1 million. Those are some of the numbers we see on TV from the largest companies. But say, for example, you're a CPG company, $10,000 might be able to get you a long way. $20,000 is not always the millions that we think initially. It's these, like you mentioned, it's these milestones that you say, can you get here? Let me see what you can do with this. Can you get here? And then once you get there, it unlocks these other levels of funding. Talk to me about what, if you're able to share, sort of what that first rung of things back then kind of costed, and what you was looking at, what you were looking for your investment to return to you at that time. Investing in the design took you to X, Y, Z, and you knew to do the next round of funding or the next kind of request of friends, family, angel investors. Talk to me about that part of the process.
Yeah, I'm happy to share with you the milestones, the key milestones that we're trying to get to. I'll be a little more cagey on the actual numbers that we raised. But, the first angel round that we raised was really to get us to a finished product that we could present to retailers. So that included things like company formation, legal fees, becoming an LLC, designing the packaging, doing some product development, getting formulation, kind of everything that goes into that first set of bean samples that we were able to, share with Whole Foods and other retailers. The second big milestone for us was going into production. Obviously, when you're producing a physical product, there's just a certain amount of capital that you have to put up to have inventory, to be in warehouses, to be able to move product from kind of one place to another. And so that was our big initial milestone. We then next was to expand into different regions and channels. So, when you start talking about moving from just being in the natural channel to being in conventional to being across the country, again, it increased the amount of working capital, some of the other resources that we need. And then finally, our most recent round was really focused on team building and innovation, right? So moving into a phase where it was no longer just myself, but rather we had the right team in place, and we're able to expand our product line. So we launched, you can see them up on the wall here, we launched these lines of rice
bone broth,
launched our bone broth rice, and then we also, started development on some other R&D items as well. And so, though that's a very high level, 10,000.
That's really helpful. I think one of the things too about your process is that in your case, you were able to get some investment support from day one, being able to get that support for design, product, legal, those types of things. Can you talk about what is that conversation like at that upfront stage when you don't yet have that product? You do have a great background as well. Talk to us about what sort of things from your experience worked in order to say, hey, from day one, I need the support. What do I say? How can I position my whole case so that I'm able to get someone to believe in me from day one? Talk to us about that.
Yeah. And again, I should have prefaced this at the beginning, but I'll say now, I'm not an expert when it comes to fundraising, anything like that. I'm just sharing my experience. So in my case, the first money that I raised was from people that I knew, right? Everyone who put money in that initial round was someone that I had known for years or, multiple years, if not longer than that, where there was just an element of social proof, right? These people all knew about my abilities in the space. They trusted me that I wasn't going to take the money and go buy, a watch, right? Like that, go into the business and moving the business forward. And so, my general advice would just be, I think the first dollars that go into most businesses are coming from some friendly capital source, right? Obviously, this round is traditionally known as a friends and family round, right? If you have friends and family with the means to invest, that's great. If not, I would encourage people to think about their professional network, their extended network, right? Even just getting a warm intro into an investor can sometimes make a big difference. And it's not easy. I don't want to make it seem like it's not easy to just get someone to give you $50,000 or $100,000, right? This is, it's a meaningful amount of money, but you do want to start, I think, from a place of familiarity where you have some social proof that you can tap into.
Yeah, I think that's good words of advice there. So we kind of started to hint on innovation that's coming. For those that don't know, of course, the beans came first, and then the current new innovation is the bone broth and rice. Talk to us about that, and then talk to us about the next frontier.
Yeah, so, first and foremost, in terms of the bone broth rice, we started with beans. As you can imagine, if you have a bean company, their natural question, well, do you make rice? Will you make rice? When are you making rice, right? It's just a very natural pairing. We knew even by looking at some of our data online that the items most purchased with our beans were some form of rice, grains, et cetera. Now, the reality situation is there are tons of options in that category, and you can also just cook rice at home. It's not hard to do, right? And so the challenge for us was, what can we bring into the category that's meaningful and different? And so what we landed on very quickly was we wanted to bring some additional nutrition into the space, right? When you look at rice. It tastes delicious, right? Particularly white rice, but it's pretty empty in terms of carbs and starch, right? It's not a lot of nutrients there. And so what we ultimately landed on was protein as an opportunity, and we felt like it would be cool to cook the rice in bone broth. So what we do is essentially, instead of using water, we use chicken bone broth. Every serving has 7 grams of protein, a few grams of collagen, and you also end up with just really rich flavors. It tastes like, something you might cook at home. And something candidly a lot of people do at home when they're making rice is use broth of some sort instead of water. So
yeah.
Yeah.
I love the bone broth rice innovation. That is something I traditionally did as well. And then I love that you were able to do it conveniently and still preserve that health factor. So kudos. I think that one is such a slam dunk. Talk to us about some of the spaces. So in a way, I'm sure you've sort of come up against this. You are in categories that are traditionally commodities, but the way you innovate in them, they are no longer exactly commodities. You've really did value adds that are significant and help you understand sort of the price points, the value proposition, your entire positioning. Talk to us about how you think about that, because I do think some people struggle with, I just want to make juice or rice or something that they don't know if it will make a difference. Talk to us about your perspective on that and what your philosophies are around making a product different or better to bring it to market.
Yeah. So first of all, it's a great question. And, I think every entrepreneur in some way is choosing between headwinds and tailwinds, right? So it's like, if you're in a fast growing category that people are flocking to and there's tons of innovation, it's like the good thing is, people are interested in it. You're going to see some growth just by being in the game. The drawback is that there's a ton of competition. There's a lot of people trying to do the same thing. And I chose kind of the different path, right? Which was, as you mentioned, these kind of large, stale categories, limited innovation. My perspective at the time was these are categories that I love as a consumer, right? Like I eat beans. Before I started the company, I probably ate beans every week. Now I eat beans every day, right? But it's like I've always been a heavy user of beans and rice, and I felt like, man, with the options that I see in the supermarket, they don't live up to my love for this product. And a lot of that gap is like you got to cook it yourself, right? Like if you want good beans or beans that are similar quality to ours, you need to go to either a restaurant or cook them on your own at home, and people just don't have the time. And so for us, we started off from a perspective of how do we bring high quality culinary taste and make it ready to go in just 60 seconds, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, maybe circling back to your question, I think the way to think about it is, can you bring a meaningful benefit into the category that's not there, right? In our case, that was around quality and convenience.
Right.
In the case of rice, it's bone broth, right?
Functional benefit. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, collagen and protein in a category that's mostly just carbohydrates, right? And so wherever we go in the future, that's really what we're focused on. It's like you can play the game of just making a Me Too product and seeing if maybe through marketing or effort you can get people to try it, but that doesn't tend to work in the long term, right? You need things that are truly different and better than the alternatives. And so that's our very simple approach to innovation.
Yeah. Talk to us about your experience back in 2020 and, taking something like COVID that could be a headwind and something that could slow you down and actually experiencing it potentially as a tailwind, something that actually could accelerate your growth. What was your experience like for your business?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we're very fortunate that COVID has been a net positive, I think, for our business. And some of the reasons are probably known to your audience, but like just the amount of dollars that shifted back into groceries and the supermarket from restaurants, food service, et cetera, particularly in the early months, right, where everybody wanted to fill up their pantry with kind of as much food as they could get. Nobody wanted to eat food from outside of their house, so just a lot of cooking at home. People had a little more time in their house when you start eliminating commutes, when you start eliminating a lot of things.
The grocery store was our trip, right? We were going and just perusing the aisles because we had nowhere else to go.
Exactly. To go see what's new at Whole Foods or whatever, right? So for all those reasons, we saw consumption go up. We just had a lot of people try the product. People were eating meals at home that they weren't before. So think about even something like lunch, right? Which most people would order from the local restaurant, a food truck near their office, or whatever the case may be. Now we have people trying to prepare lunch in between Zoom meetings or, have that already at home. So, we just opened up a lot of occasions. So that was one really big benefit. And then the second benefit for us, which was maybe a little more ominous, but, it was a benefit. It was just a renewed focus on diverse business and Black-owned business in particular in 2020. And, we got a lot of awareness and a lot of people who shared our brand and who discovered our brand during that time period. And, obviously it was predicated on like a tragedy. So it's not something that I'm necessarily like happy that it played out that way, but it did raise awareness for our brand nonetheless.
Yeah. So, now that was 2020. We're at the head of 2022. Talk to me about how some of that experience, some of the consumption increases, has most of that carried over? Have you seen any shifting behavior now that some people are hybrid remote, some folks are returning to work? A lot of the outside has opened up, if I were to say. But how has that impacted at least your categories consumption experiences?
Yeah, so a lot of the underlying trends are still in place. That the magnitude is different, right? So it's not like March 2020 in terms of people stocking their pantry, but the average American still is carrying more groceries or has more food in their house on average than they did pre-COVID. The trend towards global flavors has accelerated again, as we talked about, people just wanting to break out of that monotony a little bit, or tired of cooking the same dishes that they knew, right? The dishes they know, and want to try different things. A shift towards less meat consumption, which is not directly tied to COVID, but we've seen it accelerate in terms of people experimenting with, I'll do a meatless Monday, or, I'll try to swap out meat here and there, right? And again, are a great choice for that. So a lot of those, like I said, underlying trends, we still see them, and we think they're giving us like nice growth. We're such a small brand that, we're growing every year. We're not like, some of these big saturated businesses where it's like, you grow 5%, then you're down 4%. Like we're growing very healthily, but that's what I'll say on that one.
Yeah. And in terms of points of distribution, are you continuing? Did you see it in 2020, or you saw it sort of as you moved forward out of 2020? Or did you see more points of distribution? Were you able to pick that up off of some of those tailwinds that we discussed?
More in 2021 for us than 2020. So what happened in 2020 for a lot of retailers is just they were fighting tooth and nail to like stay in stock, get customers what they needed, not have their employees be sick. So, we saw a lot of category resets that were postponed, canceled, paid, whatever. As we got into 2021, we've started to see that number pick up. And I would say, as we look ahead to 2022, it feels like the healthiest of yet in terms of maybe really bouncing back from COVID in terms of retailers seem to be on a regular reset cadence. They kind of got their mojo back in terms of reviewing new items, bringing new items onto the shelf. And so, we're excited for next year, or I guess for this year now.
For this year, yeah. Is there any innovation currently that we should be planned for 2022 that we should be looking out for across the rest of this year?
Well, we do have a really big new product lines coming out. I can't share the details.
Of course, not yet, but we will look out.
Yeah, we'll be on the lookout. February 1st, come back to A Dozen Cousins.
Oh, soon. Okay, great.
We're right around the corner from you, so check us
out. Awesome. Okay, we love that. So in general, without telling us the specific innovation, just talk to us about what we could expect as you grow your portfolio. What can we expect from A Dozen Cousins? Where do you want to be leaning into? What do you want to continue to communicate to consumers about what they can buy from you? Is this going to be sort of staying within this complementary set here of pantry staples? Is there a shift that's coming? Talk to us kind of conceptually about where the brand is heading from what you know right now.
Yeah, so our vision for the brand has been pretty consistent since we started, which is we want to be the go-to brand for meals, right? So when you think about preparing a Creole, Caribbean, or Latin American meal, we want A Dozen Cousins to be the first thing that pops into your mind. And with that, our plan is to build out a suite of products that get you to a point where you could actually put together an entire meal just using our products, right? And so if you think about what that means in the U.S., you have vegetables, grain, protein. We intend to play kind of in all those spaces in different ways. And I'll leave it on.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, my head is running to a few places, but yes, I will look and see if those predictions are right. So as we sort of wrap through, we did get to go through some of the lessons and even some advice as we went through that. But is there anything that comes top of mind that you're like, if I get to share this with a group, I'd love to be able to share lessons or advice from parts of your experience? This is a good spot here for us to kind of lean into some of that.
Man, first of all, you asked some really good questions. So thank you again for the time and for your preparation for this conversation. The only thing I would maybe close on or just add is like, and I'm assuming that this audience is entrepreneurs or people who are thinking about starting their own business. Every business is different, man. This is so personal and idiosyncratic. I think a lot of my fellow founders sometimes get caught up in the best practices or what did this person say I should do? And it's like, look, the world is changing every day. Your business that you're building right now is very different than any other that came before, right? And so it's like, just really enjoy the experience of like building the thing that you love and that you're proud of and that you think is going to win in the marketplace. And try not to be too caught up in like comparison. They say comparison is the thief
Thief of joy.
Just enjoy your business and what you're building, and hopefully, it'll be fruitful for you.
Yeah, I do want to stick in one question here for this lessons and advice section. Mentorship. This is something I'm curious, kind of what has been your experience of mentorship? If you can give us a little bit on your experience and then talk about some of the lessons or thoughts you have on that there that the Boss Fam can take in and just consider, that would also be great.
It's a generic comment, but I'm a huge proponent of mentorship in general. I've benefited from it tremendously throughout my life and my career, starting at a very young age with my older brothers, right, which I consider a form of mentorship in terms of someone who's experienced the things you want to experience and can give you some advice and pitfalls, right? And then when I started my career, I've had great mentors really from day one, in terms of people who have taken me under their wing, who saw some potential in me and wanted to try to nurture it.
Yeah.
I would just, I would encourage people to think about mentorship as a two-way street. When I was solely on the mentee side, I didn't quite realize this, but there's a lot that mentors get from the people they mentor as well, right? And so, whether that is a fresh perspective, whether that is a different network that they're plugged into, et cetera. So, I've reached a point where I think of most of my mentorships as like peer. We're mentoring both ways. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In some cases, they're literally my peers, people who are just, we're doing the same thing. We're at the same stage. And in other cases, I have people who are my senior, but I also try to add value back to them. If I see something interesting or an article that I think they should check out or something that's relevant to their business, I'll send it kind of both ways. And so my hope is that in that way, it just feels like a more mutually beneficial relationship versus one side kind of always asking for stuff,
Yeah. Speaking of mentorship, you did something really awesome working with a few people and developing the organization called the Potluck. I'd love for you to tell us more about it. I actually personally benefited. I've been able to come to one of the events and I'm personally on that mentorship list as well for a potluck. Talk to us about that and why you started it, why you saw the need for it.
Yeah, so Project Potluck, first and foremost, is an industry organization, and now we're actually a 501c3 nonprofit.
Oh, nice.
Really focused on helping people of color build successful companies and careers in the CPG industry, right? And I'm someone, as I mentioned throughout this conversation, I started my career in CPG. I'm now a founder in the space. The reality situation is, by and large, the industry doesn't reflect the country that we live in terms of representation by people of color, either in terms of on who founds the companies, who works in them, who leads them on the boards of directors and leadership teams, et cetera. And so really the goal of the organization was to combat that disparity, right? How do we get to a point where our industry reflects the people who use the products, right? We approach it from three ways. First and foremost, we have an annual mentorship program, which it sounds like you took part in, which is open to basically, anyone who's, whether you're an employee or a founder, we pair people, put together clusters of folks and pair them accordingly. Secondly, we have a digital community where people can share jobs, opportunities, reach out and ask questions, et cetera. And then finally, we have events, right? And so, to date, they've mostly taken the form of your more digital Zoom type conferences, just because we founded the organization within this COVID world. But my hope, hopefully, is that as we emerge out of COVID one day, there's also live networking events and things that are plugged in with other activities. So that's kind of us in a nutshell. Check us out. It's potluckcpg.org. So potluckcpg.org. You can see all the organizations, programs, and sign up for the mailing list.
Awesome. So this is a great spot to ask, what does it mean for you to be Black on Shelf?
Just be myself, man. Just, I hear that term and I think of culture. I think of heritage. I think of everything that went into informing our brand, our business, the way we try to, live in the world. So I don't know if that's a good answer or a bad answer, but
yeah, it's your answer. I think for you, it really is about that representation and how all of your experiences with your culture have inspired you to build a business based off of that, right? Yeah. And finally, our own community is able to profit from that. How often do we hear cultural appropriation? It's really nice for it to actually be appropriate for you to build on your culture and be able to benefit from it. I love that. So thank you for sharing that this is something significant for you. So you heard Ibraheem talk about Project Potluck and where to follow. Now, can you share a little bit about where we could follow, where you want us to follow the brands itself? So Project Potluck CPG.
PotluckCPG.org.
PotluckCPG.org. We'll put it in the notes, and then tell us where to follow A Dozen Cousins.
Yeah, you check us out on our website, adozencousins.com, spelled just in the normal way. And then also find us on Instagram at A Dozen Cousins. Those are the two easiest places to find us.
Yes. And you could also find Project Potluck on LinkedIn. They have a thriving community there as well. We'll put all of that in the show notes. It was really great having you. Love your candor, loved your authenticity here, and just being really honest with us. It was always great. And it was super worth it to have you on and to wait however much time it took to be able to get you. We know that it's such a busy place, but thank you for coming, sharing, and being such a value add for us here on the podcast.
Thank you very much. And thank you again for having me. I appreciate it.